Okay, so this might be a little bit of a review for you, for those of you who have developed courses before. Like I said, this is just a very basic introduction of where to start developing a course. So let's see if this thing actually works. Wonderful. Okay, so when you start developing your course, say for example, you're tasked with teaching a class on fashion in the golden age of piracy, circa 1610. We have a little pirate theme going on here. We decided to make this, give it a little bit of levity here. So the place where you start, what is your course goal? What is it that you want the students to be able to do or to achieve by the end of the course? Now, what we're trying to get at here is to find, I don't know if any of you have read Bird by Bird by Annie Lamott. Yes? Okay. So we're trying to get to that 1-inch square. You have all of this content, now what are you going to do with it? Clearly, you can go very broad with the topic, or you can go very deep. It's really difficult to do both. And of course, time is limited, your time is limited, the student's time is limited, plus their attention is limited. So come on in and have a seat. The more the merrier. So like I said, the idea here is to get to that 1 little inch square of what it is that you're going to teach in your course. Okay. So once you have your course goal, you move on to developing your learning objectives. Now, usually you have these in the syllabus, and really what you're doing there is you're communicating what it is you want the students to do by the end of the course, what they should be able to do. So this is kind of an interplay between your learning objectives, your assessments, your instructional activities. So all of the content and these items interplay with each other, and at the end of the day, you form sort of like a contract, or in the spirit of our conference theme, a collaboration between the instructor and the students. So when you have those objectives on your syllabus, you're basically telling the students, this is what you can expect from me, and this is what I expect that you should be able to do by the end of the course. Now, we see a lot of objectives that don't really communicate that, and so this is why we wanted to, come on in. We wanted to do this talk, and not just write that objective, but really clarify what the purpose of that is. Okay, so learning objectives usually have 3 parts. The first part is the behavior. What the student will be able to do by the end of the course, what you're expecting them to do. The second part, oh, this is odd. Okay, here we go. Okay. The second part is the condition, the circumstances under which the behavior should be performed. And then we come to the third part, which is the criteria of how that behavior will be evaluated. Now, typically when you see learning objectives in a syllabus, usually the condition is not there, and that's usually something like, given the history of fashion in piracy circa 1650, or given the materials, describe headgear, in pirate headgear in circa 1650. So that you usually don't see there, but this is really good to think about when you're gathering your materials and you're putting things together, that it's not just what the students will be able to do and how you will grade them, but what materials, are you providing the right materials for the students to achieve that behavior given that criteria as well. And we'll show you, we'll go over some examples. Kyle will be going over some examples, so you'll see what we mean by that. Okay, so the 2 things that are really important in your learning objectives is when you're asking students to demonstrate, what you're asking your students to demonstrate must be reasonably and concretely measurable. This we see a lot. That the way the objectives are worded, it's not really measurable. The other important thing that is what you're asking your students to demonstrate also must be objectively observable. We see a lot of words like understand. By the end of this section, you should know. These are not behaviors that are observable. Knowing, understanding, this happens internally in the student. So this is not something I can see, or I can observe, or I can read. Usually you want to use action verbs like describe, list, develop, depending on, and Cal will be going over this more also, as far as what level of in Bloom's taxonomy, what you have in front of you, what level the content is and what you're asking students to do. So, Kyle, take it away.
Thank you, Mary. Does everyone have one of these in front of them to put their hands on? Anyone not?
Yeah. No, if not, I'll give them that.
There's one more. Does anyone else not have one? Yeah.
I'll take one.
So as Mary said, one of the things that, did I see it? No, okay. One of the things Mary went over was the 1-inch square. I have seen the look of widening panic in people's eyes when they sit down to develop a new course. And the first thing they go to is the knowledge they have. They just finished their degree in this subject. They feel overwhelmingly close to that material. And when it comes down to deciding what material that should be passed on to their students, it becomes this massive mess of things that they have access to, what students need to know, what things they should read, because as a teacher or a recent graduate, they read it and felt that this is important enough to pass on. But it's such an overwhelming task that they don't go much farther than, oh, they need to read this, they need to know this, and it ends up being a course without much of a narrative or directive. And starting a lot smaller is the best approach. So if we are sitting down to design a course about fashion in the golden age of piracy, we came up with 2 example objectives that would be measurable and observable to give to students, and that sort of concretely focus what you're going to give students as the teacher. So the first one we have, compare the uniform of an enlisted seaman in the Navy versus a buccaneer in the golden age of piracy. Compare and contrast stuff, which is on which level of the taxonomy in front of you?
Understand.
Yes.
Analyze.
We also have identify ways in which pirate hiring practices were inclusive of different levels of ableness and ways in which this practice influenced pirate fashion. You ever notice there's a lot of pirates with peg legs and eye patches? They were a pretty inclusive bunch. They didn't really discriminate in their hiring. If this is important enough to know, how do students demonstrate that? Do we just give them a passage in a book and say, read about how inclusive they were? How are they going to demonstrate that they know that? Identifying different ways. Usually identify is them writing it down in some fashion, proving that they know this material. Let's say that we want to have 5 course goals, and the first 2 are already written. What would we put for the next 2? Mary, maybe you can type as people
Sure.
volunteer. We all know a little bit about pirate lore, even if we're not experts on fashion. Where might you start for what students need to walk away with at the end of this course, concretely? Yes.
I guess I would use some of these terms here to come up with my next point.
Yeah,
so
that's a good place to start.
Like critique, and so I might do something like critique the notion that all pirates, wear an eye patch and a funny hat or something. I don't know.
Right. Where do those stereotypes come from? Critique the notion.
I can't write and have it's not showing. I don't have it set up that way. I'm sorry.
I'll just write directly on the screen.
Yeah.
Yeah, critique the notion that all pirates wore eye patches. It maybe came from somewhere, maybe it came from nowhere, but that's just our image of a pirate in our mind now. But where did it come from? When putting pirate fashion into context, that's relevant, absolutely. What might be another one? Yes?
Describe the most fashionable outfit in whatever age we're in the golden age, but what was most desirable? Describe the most desirable fashion item.
Absolutely. Contextualizing a pirate's costume versus, well, not costume, their garb, versus someone else's in the time period. Absolutely. We have that image of Captain Hook in the Robin Williams movie, and he's just extravagantly dressed, but some of his enlisted men were not quite so extravagantly dressed. Absolutely. I said there was going to be five goals. If we want students to demonstrate some kind of understanding of pirate fashion as garments were constructed, if that's a concrete learning goal that we want students to walk away with, we might give them a task that they would prove by demonstrating that they can do it. Oh, I don't have a remote. So we just came up with some really good examples of course objectives. Here are some ones that we've seen that I repurposed a little bit to protect the guilty, I suppose. I only changed one or two words in each of these just to give it a pirate theme, but these are course objectives we've seen that are problematic and not necessarily a problem of themselves, but a symptom of a problem in sitting down to actually conceptualize what you want students to do. If you read the first one, you will develop an understanding of the prevalence of disruptive behavior in a high seas setting. You will develop an understanding of the prevalence. That's a lot of layers of things and words. And it's unclear, putting yourself in the student's point of view, it's unclear exactly what you're going to be asked to do. Or how you would even demonstrate that you have developed an understanding of the prevalence. It could be as simple as saying, I understand that there is a prevalence of disruptive behavior, and that might be enough for some teachers, but that shouldn't be. How might we rewrite that objective to be measurable and observable and achieve what the goal seems to be implying? Yeah.
Explain prevalence?
Could be, yeah. Or explain why it's prevalent. Absolutely. Yes?
Explain the code of conduct among pirates and discuss how often that code of conduct was violated.
Yeah, or in what circumstances it was violated. Absolutely. That's simplifying things a little bit in terms of presenting it to students, but also in terms of your own thought about the objectives. Some of these are messy, and it's not a simple wording choice. That's one thing that I like to emphasize when looking at Bloom's taxonomy, is that it doesn't just mean use a different word in the objective. Usually using the wrong word in the objective is symptomatic of being a little unclear in what you're actually going to ask students to do concretely. You kind of have this idea of, they need to know all this stuff, but taking it one step further, and how am I going to deliver this to them? How am I going to phrase it in a way that lets them know exactly what's expected of them and what they're going to walk away with? The next one, you will develop an understanding of the generational differences in attitudes and incivility among pirates. Pirates is the only word I changed in that. Keeping in theme with the keynote speaker, I suppose, generational differences in attitudes and incivility. That's like 3 different things in one. And develop an understanding. I mean, a lot of people already have an intuitive understanding that there are generational differences between people. How could we rewrite this to be more clear, more focused, and better communicate what students need to know or do? Yes?
I think this one would be, it lends itself to a compare and contrast, but I think you also have been given the attitudes and incivility, that's where you have that, given circumstances.
Right.
You know, given certain qualities or given certain categories of attitudes and circumstances, compare and contrast this generation to another generation.
Absolutely. And this is, that particular objective was, this is for that one is for a healthcare course. And that kind of stuff is really important, being aware of generational differences, particularly if like younger people are working with older clientele. Being able to bridge those gaps with language and communication is super important because you need someone to feel comfortable around if you're going to be providing healthcare, or piracy in this case. But that objective, as it's worded, doesn't really communicate what it's asking or the importance of that thing. The next one is, you will develop an understanding of individual reactions to unprofessional pirate behavior. Again, pirate's the only word I changed. An understanding of individual reactions, like, so you'll be able to respond appropriately to anything that comes your way. Like, that's pretty vague, and I would say almost impossible to actually concretely achieve. What are your thoughts? How could we rephrase that to focus it and actually turn it into something concrete, even if that something concrete is a lot smaller than the objective seems to want to be?
Has that to classify different reactions or different ways in which people reacted to pirates' unprofessional behavior?
Absolutely. Once you can classify things or understand where that behavior is coming from, you can better address how to react to it. Certainly, yeah. And this last one is my favorite. You will develop a high-level framework to enhance diversity in a pirate setting. What is a high-level framework? If a student sits down to look at the syllabus on the first day and sees this and they're like, oh great, this is what I'm going to get out of this course. A high-level framework. I mean, I've been in higher education for a while and I'm not really sure what a high-level framework of anything is. Let alone a high-level framework to enhance diversity. I mean, ostensibly, this is basically saying, find a way to solve the issue of diversity in this setting. That's a monstrous goal. You can't really observe it unless a student presents an idea to you and you're like, yes, that would work. Go do. It's too big. How could we narrow it down? Yeah.
It sounds like possibly what that means is that to be able to understand structurally how staffing a pirate ship would work and therefore could replicate previous successes.
Sure. Or, exactly, like understanding how other people have done it. What things are being done to address diversity? Identify ways or models that other employers are using to enhance diversity in their workplace.
Learn how to identify best practices in pirate fashion and apply them to your own future situation.
Exactly. Something to look at other contexts, other frameworks, I suppose. But as it stands, high-level framework, enhanced diversity, these aren't really observable or measurable. And it's unfair to ask students to do something that you can't observe or measure, because then it becomes totally opaque of what you're actually grading them on. You will very quickly realize that students turn into lawyers the second their grade is at stake. They will come to your office hours with napkin math, saying, why did I get this grade on this? And if you have language like this, that again, it's not just about the wording you use, but it's about a lack of clarity in even formulating the objectives. If it ends up vague on the paper, maybe it was vague on its way to the paper. I'm not saying you're all horrible at writing objectives, but this is a common mistake for people who get overwhelmed when they're sitting down to just deal with this wealth of knowledge they have access to and what to pass on to students. So these are some fixer-uppers. And again, I want to emphasize it's not just about the wording, it's about making sure that you can justify to students when they ask questions, what is this supposed to be? You can tell them.
Aim it at the laptop.
So Bloom's taxonomy is a really complex model, or it can be. You may or may not have seen huge, elaborate versions of these, like 3D models that stretch for acres, and They all have words associated with them, like for example, design, assemble, construct. One common thing that happens in instructional design, where me and Mary sit down to consult with faculty and improve their courses, or really anything that will help them, if we point out objectives like this, you will develop an understanding of the generational differences. Then we talk about Bloom's taxonomy, and they're like, oh, so I should just, instead of saying understand, I should say discuss. It's like, well, just changing the verb doesn't necessarily make it any more clear than it was, or any more measurable or better. So think of this as a tool to help you focus yourself when you sit down to create objectives from this wealth of material that you have, obviously, because that's why you're teaching. If you want to get more into Bloom's taxonomy and how it works in theory and in practice, there's tons on the internet. It's a pretty widespread concept, but it's useful to return to even if you've done it a million times designing a course. Just to remind yourself that students have a point of view, and their experience changes, whereas I feel like instructors gets more and more entrenched in a certain way of doing things the more that they teach. But each new generation of learners is learning differently. So coming back to this and just reconceptualizing what you're asking students to do can be very helpful. And now, because I said that we were going to write 5 course objectives, we had these 2, and we came up with 2 more. The 5th one is actually to construct a pirate hat. This is to make sure that this Bloom's taxonomy doesn't go in the garbage, right, when we walk out. So we'll fold it up and make it a little bit smaller so you can carry it around. What we didn't really anticipate was that you guys wouldn't have a hard surface to fold or do creases on, but you know what? We'll do our best. So the first step with your Bloom's taxonomy, get a piece of paper and place it in front of you, east to west.
I'm going to do it along with you guys. Actually,
Or hamburger style, as I was taught.
if you do it with the Bloom's taxonomy out, yeah, your hat will be a little bit more colorful.
Yeah, the point will be the point of the pyramid.
So you fold it like this first, and then
After
Okay.
everyone has theirs folded, hamburger style, fold it down again.
like this. So take it and fold it down like this.
Just kidding.
And then just kidding, open it back up again.
We needed that crease there.
Yeah, you need to have this crease there, so that's why, just kidding.
Awesome. And now, take the northeast corner and the northwest corner and fold them down diagonally so they meet in the middle. Oh, the fold should be at the top up here.
So, like this.
It's okay if you
Oh,
end up
sorry.
with an upside down pirate hat.
I actually folded it wrong, yeah. Sorry, it should be where the crease is here, fold it down like this.
Then at the south end, you'll have a flap on the front and a flap on the back. Yeah, you guys got it.
And then you have your little pirate hat. We thought we should have a little fun in the mornings, the first sessions of the day, so.
So please keep these, and like I said, if you want to learn more about Bloom's taxonomy or how it can help you sit down to focus your efforts when designing a new course, you can look online, or you can just unfold this, and when you're sitting down to write your objectives and conceptualize this course from the ground up, just see if you can point on the pyramid to where each objective is. And then justify it to yourself so that you can justify it to students. I guess we have a couple minutes.
Oh, we have some time, so we can answer a few questions. Actually, one thing I wanted to mention while you were speaking. So words like understand, another one we see a lot is develop an appreciation for. It's not very clear of what that means to the student. So words like that, it's not that you can't ever use them, but we think they're more appropriate in something like a course description. When you write your little blurb about what your course is about, those words are more appropriate for that. Whereas you want concrete, measurable, and observable words when you're writing your learning objectives. So I just didn't want to discourage, like, oh my God, I can't ever write understand on anything. That's not the case. It's just more appropriate for a course description.
And some of that has to do with, I think, a misunderstanding of like what department policy is, like what goes on a syllabus. Departments will say, you need course objectives, and the teacher sits down and like, oh, okay, well, I guess I hope they gain an appreciation or an understanding of this.
Right.
But course objectives are like, that's course objectives with a capital CO, like that's a specific thing, like a contract between you and students.
Right.
But things that are kind of like, oh, my hopes and wishes for you as students and people, I hope you gain an appreciation for this thing, but also I'm not grading you on that.
Well, and you can't control that either. I can't force someone to
Right,
appreciate something.
how might you measure someone's appreciation for something? Like hook them up to an EKG and
Get their brain scanned or
Yeah.
something like that. So, does anybody have any questions? Anything?
yes.
So at Rutgers, are course objectives required on syllabi, or is it department by department?
It's universally good practice. I think it might be department specific whether or not it's required.
Don't the curriculum committee or the CEP, when they review the courses, they require them?
Yeah,
So to
some
get them
departments don't have
approved, I think
curriculum
they
committees,
do.
so there might not be a gatekeeper, but if there is, if anyone were to ever point it out, like, the jig would be up. But most curriculum committees, all curriculum committees, will not pass anything that doesn't adhere to very strict standards. And things like gain an understanding or gain an appreciation of, they will call you out on that. Good question. Yes?
So as instructional designers, have you guys ever come across like interesting ways to make the objectives more interesting for students? Like maybe students can help write one or two objectives or something, because I feel like, students, they get the syllabus, they say, oh, objectives, whatever. So how to make them care about this stuff that you're slaving over and making?
In my experience, students tend to care more about the unit objectives. So you have your main course objectives, and then it's good practice to break it down so that each unit has its own set of objectives. And I think that's where the students really hone in, because that's what they're looking at week by week. As far as interesting, I know they're usually listed there. Usually, to get the students to read a syllabus, the instructors usually have them do a quiz. Actually, one instructor I worked with had a really good idea about, he would purposely put mistakes in, and then some were not on purpose, so we would have the students find the mistakes in the syllabus. As far as like, you mean like a graphical representation or anything like that? I mean, usually it's,
You
yeah.
guys are the ones that see so many different things, so it'd be neat to see.
Yeah, I haven't seen any yet, but that's
I mean,
interesting.
typically, like, I mean, we talk about objectives either at the course level or the unit level as a contract between you and students. I mean, at the end of the day, you're the one who has to decide what they need to learn. But there's a lot of opportunity for that sort of student input at, I would say, at the unit level. But a lot of that interesting aspect, or just making it more fun, caring about that stuff that they're toiling over, that comes in the methods of assessment or the activities that are given to students. Like the difference between a project or a multiple choice test. I mean, that's where a lot of the opportunity for that is. At the end of the day, the goals tend to be pretty static to the subject matter or to the teacher's taste and expertise, but that variety tends to come from assessments and activities. Dina is also one of our colleagues.
Yes.
Who was nice enough to attend.
Jump in on this. Something that I think is sort of another way to get at engaging students with the objectives is, as they said, having those module level objectives too, but also being really, really transparent and clear with the students about how all this ties together. So moving beyond, okay, here are the objectives for the course, and they read it in the syllabus and they forget about it. So one of the things that an instructor I worked with did that worked really well is at the beginning of every module, she had a brief one-paragraph narrative introduction where she explained, these are the objectives for this module, this week, whatever it is. This is how these instructional materials that I've chosen, this is how the readings are going to help you. You're going to practice it through this activity and that activity. And then on the assessment, I'm going to be able to see that you met those things. So everything feels really purposeful. And that's really what you're looking for, is because when students feel that they're not just doing the reading because they were told to do the reading, they're doing the reading because the reading helps them get to here, which helps them get to here, which helps them get to here. When everything feels connected, it's easier to help students see the meaning and get that buy-in.
Yeah, and that reminds me of what Jim Collins was saying during the keynote when he said the Generation Z likes the, transparency, openness, clarity, and value for
Yeah,
children.
because their time is really a premium. So it's, I don't want to spend 2 hours doing this reading if I don't understand why it's important.
And if you're teaching online, this is where you can get a little more creative and create some engagement there, where you can have, instead of having a written introduction, you can have a video introduction. And then that way, if you're teaching online, your students see you, even though it's a video of you, there's still that, they're still seeing you and hearing you and feeling your presence in that video.
As Gina was saying, and Jim Valnoy saying that that need for transparency, I think there's a rich history in academia of the lecture and then the responsibility being placed on the students to make those connections. Like, if a student has a question, how does this relate to the course objective or something? I've run into the attitude of, if you don't know that, like, what are you even doing in college? And I mean, that's kind of an extreme example, but the sort of didactic lecture and the sense-making being the student's responsibility solely is kind of falling out of fashion. And we hope to drive that out of fashion, in fact, because that need for transparency and connectedness and something cohesive and some kind of narrative in the course that communicates that you have thought about this start to finish and that you aren't just laying the track before the train and that you didn't just gather up all of the textbooks and books and stuff that you've read and throw them into the course and try to piece together the narrative later. Again, these are kind of extreme examples, but just to illustrate the point that that kind of cohesion and transparency is something that particularly online students want because they don't have the benefit of being in a classroom and having some of that additional context that may come their way. It's all there for them and they kind of want to know where their money went. Yes?
So I'll just make a short commercial pitch for the lunchtime plenary, which is dealing with engagement, and I think will dovetail nicely with the framework that you just sort of established here.
Attend this. Student engagement
Yes.
is super important. Ways of generating it and maintaining it, and
Absolutely.
like in the keynote speech, the second you've lost someone's attention, getting it back takes a monumental effort, if it's even possible.
Any other questions?
Does it make sense to you to think of, when you're starting a course, to think about the end point first, and then go back to write the objectives of what, in other words, what you want them to actually do by the end of the course, and then design the objectives to match that?
So, yes, absolutely. I mean, that's what I meant by kind of you thinking about it in that 1-inch square where you're starting with the end. What's that goal at the end of the course that you want them to do? So starting there and then breaking that down into observable and measurable objectives.
Okay. I may be in a different situation. I'm actually high school and planning for high school courses. So there's so many different units. I'm wondering if, maybe I should consider breaking it down, English 9, breaking it down into different units first and kind of thinking in each one and then kind of backwards planning.
I mean, in the end, like when you're thinking about course objectives of what students are going to walk away with, you are kind of starting at the end. What is the product that they're going to have? Product is kind of a dirty word, but like what is going to be the fruit of their labor?
And if it helps you to break it down that way, then by all means. I mean, there's no one right answer of doing anything, as we all know. So, if that's how I know with high school it's a lot of material that's covered, and it's over an entire year, really, not even just a semester. Hey, British Lit was a great class. I loved British Lit in high school. But, so if that helps you, then, by all means, because it's really that interplay between the objectives and then the student activities and their assessments.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Welcome. I'm just going to advance to the next slide while we're here because that has our contact information on it. But we still have some time, so by all means, more
If
questions.
you want to stick around and ask some questions that aren't maybe directly related to what we were talking about, but any teaching or instructional design thing. We'll be here.
So what else can your office do for new faculty or, developing the course? I mean, I know this was just the objective portion, but
Everything.
give a little
Everything
commercial? Okay.
under the sun.
From like tearing your hair out, I just got asked to do this thing yesterday, all the way to like, I've been teaching this for 5 years, I just want to change it up a little bit.
And where's your office? Is it on Bush or?
Our physical office is in the public safety building on the
Okay.
corner of Commercial and George.
But we can find a venue that works.
But we travel. We like to travel. We can visit. You can come to us. We can go to you. You're welcome. Any other questions?
Okay, well,
Okay.
as we said, we'll be here.
Yeah,
for
we'll be
about 5
hanging
minutes.
out, so we'll be here for a few more minutes if you want to talk to us individually or if you have any other questions related to anything instructional design. Thank you very much for joining us today.